Everything Old is New Again, America's entertainment pop culture talk show.
It may well possess a rudimentary intelligence.
I'm trying to think, but nothing happens.
Felt a great disturbance in the force.
Hello, I'm Mr. Red.
Come on, bark like a dog for me.
Where's the goodies?
Leave the gun. Take the cannoli.
I bet you wouldn't have done anything like this if Mom and Dad were here.
You filthy criminal.
Excuse me while I whip this out.
Go ahead. Make my day.
Here are your hosts, Douglas Viviani and David Cohen.
All I do is, I get into the most entertaining conversation with you guys. They're provocative and they're fun.
Yeah, hey, Douglas and David, I got to say, I was interviewed on NPR by Scott Simon, another hero, but you guys are my new heroes, and I easily include you into the Scott Simon milieu of brilliant guys on radio.
Oh, wow, so. Thank you.
How about that? Welcome to Everything Old is New Again. Peter Weller, RoboCop himself, giving us some compliments, a favorite guest of the show. We have another favorite guest of the show here today, along with David Cohen, our resident Harlequin. David Cohen, how are you today?
I'm well, Douglas. Thank you.
That's good. We're with David Cohen and Dan Neuburger, our kidder in control, if you will. Dan, how are you?
So glad to have this time together.
And what are we doing?
Laugh and sing a song.
That's it. What are we doing? We're still in the middle of May Mayhem. We've finally gotten down our list of 68.
Changing title.
Yes.
We're down to 16.
68 to 16. We're in the sweet 16 right now of the funniest humans of all time, if we will. Martin Short, Larry David, Betty White, David Letterman, Gary Shandling, Richard Pryor, Howard Ramis, Bob and Ray, Neil Simon, Eddie Murphy, Walter Matthau, Marx Brothers, Will Ferrell, Albert Brooks, Abbott Costello, Steve Martin. Are any of your favorites missing? I'm sure there are, David.
Yeah, and I'm just going to point something out, all right? This is not meant to be funny or anything, but just statistically. So of the Sweet 16, one woman, two men of color, and the rest white guys, and not one who is probably under the age of 65 as we speak. But okay. But, you know, that it is what it is. And I think that's comedy has been dominated by white men, and that's
or the judges are stocked heavily with white men.
With white men. I think I would say at least 2/3 of us, Dan, if not 3/3. Yeah, that's where we came out. So obviously this is completely subjective and no real meaning should be assigned to it at all. So with that, let's go to the show.
All right,
so disclaimer.
I didn't know what that. Our first.
I felt I needed to say it for me. Yeah.
All right, our first setup, our first pairing: Martin Short against Larry David. We're doing a round robin here of who begins the discussion this week or this time. It's David Cohen to begin. Who do you think is funnier, Larry David or Martin Short?
I don't know. Well, this is too hard now. How do you compare Larry David and Martin Short? There's no way one of them should move forward and not the other one. But I would say, you know, just looking at him, and I had no preconceived notions about this. I would say pound for pound over the years, you know, Martin Short has just made me laugh a little bit more than Larry David, who I think is a genius. So Martin Short, I guess, is a little more of a genius to me.
Okay. To me, I love Martin Short. I love everything he's done. He does make me laugh. He's prepared at the talk shows. He's inherently funny. He has routines that he does. He has imitations that he brings to the table, characters that he's created for SCTV and beyond. But Larry David, I don't want to underestimate his factor in not only, of course, Curb Your Enthusiasm, but Seinfeld, which is to me at the time a perfect comedy show, a perfect sitcom, if you will. And I believe that he was involved for this first 7 years of that show intimately, so we cannot underestimate that as well. So for that reason, for the behind the scenes as well as the performing and the development of the type of show that he has now, where, you know, you're using your creativity as a performer next to him without a script, basically, I pick Larry David. Going to make it difficult for Dan Neuburger.
So
I think I know what Dan's going to say, though.
So, okay, so you're split on this. All right. David, write down on a card what you think I'm going to say, and then when I'm done, I want to see what you thought I was going to say.
I'm writing it right now.
So here's the deal. I mean, Martin Short is brilliant. I mean, he makes me laugh in everything that he does, but I can't not advance Larry David. I mean, Larry David, I think he was the reason why, there you go, David wrote down Larry David. I actually, you may recall in a prior episode, I had picked Christopher Guest over Martin Short. I was in the minority there, and Martin Short squeaked by. Larry David was my guy over Lucille Ball, who's brilliant. So I'm gonna cast my vote for Larry David. I just think everything that guy does, and one of your listeners said it perfectly previously. I think it was David K. in New Jersey, if I remember correctly, but he said that this guy, Larry David, makes the most mundane thing outrageously funny. And I love that about him. So I'm going to go with Larry David.
All right, good. We've got Larry David going to the Elite 8. Let's move on. I begin this one with David Letterman against Betty White. We've already talked about, both of these and all of these parties before. Now up against each other, what's the determining factor between Betty White, who's a wonderful performer, created at least, if not more, than 2 unique characters on sitcoms, and of course was on Saturday Night Live a number of times, and I mean we can go on. She's a performer extraordinaire, and she really makes me smile when I see her. David Letterman was, to me, a different type of talk show host that I welcomed, that was perfect for the time, that created a show, or at least had a part in, of course, creating a show that had irreverence and didn't always just toe the party line with the guests, and you were never bored because there was always something new going on, whether it be one of his skits running around town, whether it be throwing something off a roof, or anything in between, crushing things with a steamroller. I mean, whatever. It was very creative and new. So, and I love the fact that a lot of what he did was, of course, from his own creativity. So to me, it's David Letterman. Dan, where are you?
So these two both came out of busted brackets for me. So this completely threw a monkey wrench into my whole train of thought. So I got to rethink all this now. Agree, David Letterman. You made a point in one of the earlier episodes about Letterman, in that you would actually look forward every night to watching him late at night. And I was thinking to myself while you were saying that, that's true. It's been a really long time since I've done that. Even though I prefer to binge watch TV now, there's very few programs that I will look to record to watch it religiously. I feel terrible about eliminating Betty White because she's the only woman that's left on this list, and she's brilliant in her own right. But now that I'm dealing with 2 busted brackets, I'm going to go with David Letterman.
David Cohen.
Yeah, I would. This is also very difficult, but again, just personal preference here. I have to go with David Letterman as well. Just all the years of laughing out loud he gave me. I can't not vote for him.
And just while I have a minute or two, what are some of the funniest things that come to mind, or at least characteristics that you loved about that show so much?
The David Letterman show?
Yes.
What I loved about it was he was really unpredictable. He was always coming up with some kind of new bit that he hadn't done before. And he'd repeat a lot of them, obviously, if they worked. But, especially in the beginning years, he would have a guest on, some weird guy, like, speaking of Bob and Ray, what's his name? Son.
Yeah.
Chris
Elliott. Bob Elliott.
Chris Elliott, the guy behind the
or Larry Bud Melman.
Stairs. Yeah. But it seems like every week he'd come up with a new skit that was completely original and really funny. And that was important to me. And also, I think the way he treated some of his guests, I think he was, not always kind to his guests. And that was completely different too. And I really enjoyed that as well.
Right. He challenged you. If you were a guest on that show, he challenged you. You're not going to just do like we said, the party line. You're not going to just give me what the movie's about. We're going to talk about something else too. We're going to dive into, we're going to explore why you did this and whatever it might be, or something completely different. So we miss him, I think, significantly, but time moves on. So, all right, there we have Larry David, David Letterman. This is going to be a tough one. And then we get down to the Elite 8, but they're in it. Let's continue on Everything Old is New Again right after this. David Cohen just found this organization, Personal Chef to Go. In these times, it's tough, man. Food shopping with that mask on, bring the food up, cook, and all this. You know what? Have you heard of this?
I have. I'm a customer.
You get the food delivered? Yeah. Tell me a little about it.
They're professional chefs, and they create fully prepared, fresh, restaurant-quality meals at a fraction of the cost of eating out. And their meals are much healthier because they have less fat, salt, sugar, and they ship fresh, never frozen, nationwide, express, safely to your doorstep. And shipping, always free.
And listen, it comes down to like $9 a meal. That's nothing. $9 a meal. And you want another 20% off? Use the code CHEF20. CHEF20. Tell them Everything Old is New Again sent you to personalchef2go.com. That's personalchef2go.com. Personalchef2go.com.
You're listening to Everything Old is New Again, America's entertainment pop culture talk show with Douglas Viviani and David Cohen.
Hi, my name is Paul Dooley. I am an actor, and you're listening to Everything New is Old Again. No, Everything Old is New Again.
Ah, there we are. Yeah, you got it right. You played with it a little bit there. That's the Dad in 16 Candles and so much more. Fun movie. Funny movie, too. And that's what we're talking about here. All things comedy, if you will. We're bringing our Sweet 16 to the Elite 8. And we now have a competition here between Gary Shandling and Richard Pryor. Dan Neuburger is with us. He begins the discussion.
Okay, this bracket actually isn't that difficult in my mind. It's interesting because both of these guys came from brackets that were more difficult for me making my decision to get them here. But since I didn't vote for Gary Shandling, I went with Dana Carvey in the Pryor round. And I did go with Richard Pryor, who I think is just absolutely hilarious. You talk about like who makes you laugh out loud. I find Gary Shandling entertaining. Richard Pryor makes me laugh out loud. This is like a really easy one for me. I'm going with Richard Pryor.
Here we go, David.
Yeah, this is really tough for me. It's been a while. I mean, I remember Richard Pryor. You know, this is kind of the sad part of it, but I remember laughing at him a lot when I was a kid, but I haven't seen Richard Pryor like on film or anything. I've had no reason to go back to see Richard Pryor. And I think that, unfortunately, like I have to hold that against voting for him right now. I don't know. There's no other way for me to kind of slice the baby, as they say. So I'm going to go with Gary Shandling.
Well, have you gone, I'm just as an aside here, not to change your mind in any way, shape, or form, just curious, have you gone back, just to finish the thought, and seen Gary Shandling's old works recently?
Yeah, and part of it is because my son he started getting into the Larry Sanders Show. So I would sit there and, rewatch a lot of those with him. And it's just so great, so good. But, Richard Pryor, am I going to go back and watch Silver Street? No, I'm never going to watch that movie again. Am I going to somehow remember let's pull up an old Richard Pryor stand-up routine on YouTube? No. So I don't. It's not in my mind. So that's why I'm going for Gary Shandling. That and that alone. That's it.
Interesting. When I look at Gary Shandling, I do think of the two TV shows, especially the Larry Sanders. When I think of Larry Sanders, I wonder how much participation he had in the actual writing of it, but whatever, because he was funny in it, but he surrounded himself by funny people as well with funny circumstances. And of course he had a hand in that. And I absolutely love that show. I could watch all of those episodes all over again and probably laugh out loud again for all of those shows. I have gone back and watched Richard Pryor. He comes up every so often on HBO or something or other, late night, where you see his late night performing in the 70s, his stand-up routines. And he was a pioneer for sure as a stand-up comedian. The topics he chose, the way he dealt with people, the way he dealt with himself, self-deprecating as well, imitations, dirty, which was different in the day, using dirty words, which weren't allowed back in the day too, for the not first time, but I'm just saying he was able to open doors. I did enjoy some of his film work, certainly not Superman 4, but some of them, and I agree, David, I wouldn't necessarily go back and watch him perform in a movie. And TV, there's a couple Saturday Night Live skits which were great. So, man, it's like the performer versus the TV show. I know Shanley performs too, don't get me wrong, but stand-up wise, Richard Pryor beat Shanley on, by a hair, stand-up wise, but performing wise, Gary Shanley does in these movies and TV shows. So, Shanley was more or less a TV show. So where do I go with it? I have no idea. I'm just going to pick Richard Pryor based on the fact that I really thought that he was groundbreaking in his day, and Gary Shandling of the Larry Sanders Show was more or less a straight person, but that's like splitting hairs. But that's where I'm at. Richard Pryor. Anything from anybody?
Good choice.
All right, so there we go. Richard Pryor. Now we have the next batch. Harold Ramis against Bob and Ray. Dan, you start us off.
So I just want to address something that David mentioned a moment ago, because I think it's important. When you slice a baby, always go with the grain, just so you know. Okay, so Harold Ramis against Bob and Ray.
Yes.
Wow. Talk about sort of behind the scenes brilliance. Oh, God. I obviously I love Harold Ramis. I voted for him in the last round. In terms of writing, I don't know that there's very many comedic minds that are much better than Harold Ramis. Maybe Mel Brooks comes to mind, a few others, but not very many. Bob and Ray, as entertainers themselves, were so captivating. And it's such a shame that a lot of people these days don't even know who Bob and Ray are. I'm going to give the nod to Bob and Ray, because I just found them to be so funny over a long period of time, a long time ago. And when I listen to them now, which I rarely do, admittedly, but when I do, they still make me laugh. It's still funny to me. So Bob and Ray.
There we go. David Cohen.
Yeah, I agree with that. I got to go with Bob and Ray too. Harold Ramis was a brilliant mind and a great writer of movies and scripts. I don't think he was a great performer at all. So I got to give the edge to Bob and Ray, because I thought they were funnier performers and they were good writers as well. So yeah, Bob and Ray.
There we go. And improv people as well. Bob and Ray, if you ever get a chance to listen to anything that they do, they did a ongoing sitcom, if you want to call it, or a soap opera that would play 5 minutes every day, Mary Backstage Noble Wife, which to talk about improv and talking about setting up situations and just going off. It's what they did before. I know it was on the radio, but it was done before, Christopher Guest did it in the movies, if you will. Harold Ramis, I absolutely love everything that he wrote, and writers do count. But Bob and Ray wrote the material as well. They did have writers, or a particular writer, believe it or not, that they would receive some material from in the West Coast. But they wrote a large portion of what they did, as well as the improv that they clearly did. And they did it every day on the radio, day in and day out. So the genius of that, if you want, I don't want to use that word too much, but to me, they're geniuses. If you haven't heard them, don't go to YouTube and watch them on a television show. Try to listen to them, or you've got various clips, many clips all over the YouTube. Listen to them on the radio. They're radio performers. But to me, Bob and Ray win it. David Cohen, I didn't know that you were a Bob and Ray listener back in the day when we were in high school, or did I forget that? Did you listen to them on WOR? Or no?
No, I did not. No.
Okay.
No.
So how did you catch up in some ways to knowing a bit about them?
From when we started doing this show.
Okay.
And we had a show on them, about them, at least one.
Yeah, we've had a couple actually. Yeah.
Yeah. So I started going back at that time and looking at some of the stuff. I mean, I was familiar with it, but I didn't really know it in depth. So
right. Well, there you go.
Yeah, it was from that point that they kind of won me over.
Well, Bob and Ray, Richard Pryor, David Letterman, Larry David are in the Elite Eight. When we come back, we're going to argue over and see who's going to come out here on top, with Neil Simon, Eddie Murphy, Walter Matthau, Marx Brothers, and thereafter Will Ferrell, Albert Brooks, Abbott Costello, Steve Martin. This is going to be some event you've got to listen to. May Mayhem here on There We Go, Old Is New Again. We'll be right back right after this.
Early shovel. That's what I thought you said. Hi, this is Lee Merriweather. You're listening to Everything Old is New Again with Doug Viviani and David Cohen. They are great guys.
How about that? How about that? Lee Merriweather.
Lee Merriweather. Wow, that's an upgrade. That's impressive.
Thank you. Yeah, Catwoman herself. She did so much more. Barney Miller and Time Machine, or Time Tunnel, I think it was.
I was in love with her for a while.
Yeah, she was a terrific guest. Remember her, David Cohen?
Oh yeah, yeah. Very, very fun. Yeah, she was great.
Very nice lady. We're here on Everything Old is New Again, and we're in the midst of determining who's going to be in the Elite Eight, the NCAA bracket kind of situation where we're eliminating, as we go, 68 funny people down to the funniest person of all time. We are now up to David Cohen going to lead us off on Neil Simon versus Eddie Murphy. David Cohen, take it away.
Oh, boy. I would say Neil Simon, Eddie Murphy. This is one of those like impossible decisions. But with that said, look, one thing you can say about Neil Simon, and he did write some plays which were not very funny, good. But wow, what a contribution to like just American humor. I mean, he's just legendary. Eddie Murphy, I don't know if you could say the same thing about Eddie Murphy. I don't know, but also someone who's just always made me laugh too. I don't know. For some reason, I'm leaning towards, toward Neil Simon. Neil Simon. Yeah.
Okay. Neil Simon for David Cohen. For myself, I will say, I remember, David, do you remember we were at East Side Comedy and we saw Eddie Murphy there in the infancy, the beginning of his career. And we thought it was hysterical there. He was great on Saturday Night Live. He did some wonderful movies in the 80s and 90s. And then I keep bringing it up, but I think this is what taints it a smidge for me, is that he didn't just stop, but he sort of went down a road of some movies that just really flops left and right, if you want to call it that, towards the end here. And, Nutty Professor and, I don't know, Adventures of Pluto Nash and Dr. Dolittle, Haunted Mansion. There's a number, Daddy Daycare. There's a number that just didn't work. And if you're going to be the funniest person of all time, I don't know that you can have that many misses in my world. Now, Neil Simon had misses too. So who had the less misses and who had the higher highs? I have to say Neil Simon, to me, had the higher highs than Eddie Murphy, though, of course, all of these is very close. To me, it's Neil Simon. Dan?
I think when you take chances, you run a greater risk of having some flops. And I think both of these guys have taken some chances in their careers. But I think you both raise interesting points about the fact that Eddie Murphy did have a bunch of things that were like, meh, like I could take it or leave it, didn't really think it was all that funny. Neil Simon, although, he did have some plays that were flops, it didn't feel like he had as many. I mean, he certainly had a lot of plays that were amazing. And I think I'm okay. I mean, you guys both voted for Neil Simon, so it almost doesn't make a difference what I say, but I think I would have probably gone with Eddie Murphy, but I'm perfectly fine with Neil Simon.
All right, so there you go. We've got Neil Simon on that bracket. How about, this is going to be interesting, Walter Matthau against the Marx Brothers. I begin this. I think, they both have tremendous longevity. They've been around for a long time, both of them. But that's not really the determining factor at all, but it's just something to say. Again, Walter Matthau always made me smile, and I was entertained. When the Marx Brothers hit it, and it could be any of the three Marx Brothers, I not only was entertained, but I was giggling or laughing, and or still even quoted some of the Groucho lines and so forth. So to me, it's close, but again, I think it's hard to beat the Marx Brothers for a comedy team or funny people, as opposed to Walter Matthau was entertaining and put a smile on your face. That's where I'm at. So it's Marx Brothers for me. Dan?
I would have to agree with you. I mean, Walter Matthau, I think, was more talented maybe is the right way to say. He had more breadth to his acting ability. He was funny. He was serious. I loved his work. I've said it before. I'll say it again. The Odd Couple, I think, is one of the funniest movies ever written and acted. But the Marx Brothers, if a Marx Brothers, anything, even Groucho Marx in his what was it, the name of his talk, his game show?
You Bet Your Life.
Bet Your Life. Even on that, I enjoyed watching him, and he was way past his prime then. But the Marx Brothers, when I was growing up, especially my brothers, my cousins, and I, we would all gather around the black and white TV to watch these old, or maybe it was a color TV, but it was a black and white movie. I'm not sure now that I think about it, but we would just like magnets be drawn to the TV to watch the entire thing, and we'd laugh out loud. So David has mentioned, and I agree, that a lot of this is about what really makes you laugh out loud. Walter Matthau, very entertaining to watch. Love stuff that he's in, but Marx Brothers make me laugh out loud. So I will agree with you with the Marx Brothers.
There we go. David Cohen, your 3 cents, if you will.
Yeah, I think it's a little unfair, 3 to 5 guys versus one guy. But I'm going to go with the Marx Brothers too, just from a pure comedy standpoint. They made me laugh a lot over the years. And I still will go back and watch a Marx Brothers movie. I will do that.
And I'll say this is interesting though. There are days where you're sitting around and I don't know, it's a Friday night or something, whatever. You want to watch something, or a Saturday afternoon, and so many of what we're talking about here, so much of the work of all of these people that we've been talking about is just doesn't come up. It's not like suggested for you, watch the Marx Brothers. You have to go out of your way to do it. So my point is, for you to say that, for you to say, I will go back and watch that, it has to be a conscious effort to then, they're there, but you've got to dig up the movies and make an effort to get them. It's not just thrown in your face by the algorithm or whatever it might be. So I respect that. And I think that that's a very interesting and telling factor. And in some ways sad, where they don't have, I don't know, DirecTV, I don't know what you have, but whatever these different, setups you have, with the cable, and they don't really give you choices, I guess, unless you're choosing Abbott Costello and Marx Brothers movies. Then you get in the algorithm where they start showing you the older ones. But it's hard to, I get to the TV and it's hard. Pick a movie for the kids and the family to watch. And then I'm going A through Z. It takes a long while to figure out what to watch. If you're a younger person now, will you be exposed to the Marx Brothers? Probably not. Maybe this show will get them to do so. I don't know. Dan?
I don't think my kids have ever watched a Marx Brothers movie, at least not to my knowledge, which makes me sad because it was such a big part of, growing up. I remember Red Skelton movies and the Marx Brothers movies. And you're right, stuff that nobody ever watches anymore because it's not the sexy stuff. But if you really want to go back to the roots of comedy or drama or whatever, you go back to the source. You go back to the well, at least, when you were younger and what you saw in your formative years as the beginning, so to speak. How do you not give a nod to some of the folks that we've talked about over the course of the last few episodes? People like Sid Caesar and Jackie Gleason and so on. But a lot of people today, they don't appreciate those people and what they contributed to comedy because they just have really never been subjected to it. And I think the same thing is true with the Marx Brothers.
I agree, and it's kind of sad. We had a show, David and I were talking about, especially David, I was digging into his knowledge, if you will, of silent movie comedians. Remember that, David? And
sure, yeah.
You opened the door to Harold Lloyd and so many others that we can mention for a moment here that no one watches besides Charlie Chaplin. There are others, and they were, even Laurel and Hardy was in silent movies, and at some point there's other things on TV besides, I'll pick on the Kardashians, whatever, besides these silly shows to watch. No one's watching some of this stuff, and they should. David?
Yeah, but by the way, I'm sorry, David, to interrupt you, but the thing about the silent era in comedians is there are virtually no good one-liners.
All right, that's a good thing. We'll go out on that. We'll be back right now, right here on Everything Old is New Again. Will Ferrell against Albert Brooks, Abbott Costello against Steve Martin. David Cohn, what are you doing this weekend?
Oh, you know us, Doug. We're always ordering in. We never go out, especially during these times, right? But I got to tell you, I found this new place to order from. Because when you use Grubhub, places like that, I mean, they're starting to charge delivery fees now. And, you know, I'm feeling bad, so I'm tipping the guys a lot more than usual. But I found this other solution.
What's that? What, no more food shopping? What do you got to do?
Nope, PersonalChef2Go.com. Professional chefs, they create fully prepared, fresh, restaurant-quality meals at a fraction of the cost of eating out. It's a perfect solution to receiving healthy meals right directly to your home without having to go out and having to pay those high delivery fees that I'm paying right now.
Or go to the grocery store and do all of that. It saves you like 10, 15 hours a week. Rotating menu. You want to use a coupon, CHEF20. CHEF20 will save you 20% off your order. That's amazing.
So that's what I'm doing.
All right, PersonalChef2Go.com. PersonalChef2Go.com. Also, you can contact them by phone at 877-233-4208.
Hi, this is Bert Navarre. I'm lead guitarist, co-writer, and proud member of the Knack. And you're listening to Everything Old is New Again with Douglas Viviani and David Cohen.
Ah, that's nice to hear that. Nice and simple and straightforward, and got it straight from the Knack. We're here and Everything Old is New Again. We're almost to the point where we are at our Elite 8 of who is the funniest of all time. We have 4 more parties to evaluate, if you will, and Dan Neuburger will start that with us right here with Will Ferrell against Albert Brooks.
One of the easiest brackets that we have come up across in, I think, since the beginning for me. There's no question. You know, again, my wife said it perfectly. Got to go with the elf. There's no question in my mind. Will Ferrell is laugh out loud funny to me in so many different things that he's done. Even at work, I call up this one guy that I work with, a colleague of mine, and I always say, "Hey, Ricky Bobby," and we do a shtick, or I'll say to people in an award ceremony, I'll quote Ron Burgundy, so there's no question in my mind. Will Ferrell is deeply embedded in my psychotic brain.
From one psychotic brain to the next, David Cohen?
Yeah, I agree. Will Ferrell, for sure, over Albert Brooks. Not to take anything away from Albert Brooks, but yeah, same thing. Will Ferrell, almost anything he's in just cracks me up. And all the sketches he did on SNL, my gosh, all those characters, just so funny. So, yeah. The only thing I didn't like was when he was on The Office. That was the only time I didn't really like Will Ferrell. I just thought he played it was a bit too wacky, a little too dark for me. But regardless, yeah.
And what do you think of Albert Brooks in terms of, I'm looking at his work here, and there's a lot of gaps in between movies, and that's really where he sort of put himself into recently. I mean, he did some television, of course, but from like even the 80s forward, from the Twilight Zone movie forward, few and far between are the movies. Yeah, he was in Finding Dory, but he wasn't a comedian or funny in that, right? His own movies, if you want to say the ones that he created. You've got Lost in America, Modern Romance, Defending Your Life was really kind of funny, but not really. Mother's Not, there's funny stuff, but they're not that funny. So his career, I don't know. He's an enigma in some ways because he's really creative, and I love that, but he's not done all that much stuff. Will Ferrell is everywhere and continuing. It's got to be 20 years, right? That he's continuing to produce product, if you want to call it that, of fun and funny things. Does that count for anything? I don't know. Will Ferrell certainly wins, gets my vote as well. Dan, you were going to say something about that?
I'm just thinking out loud here.
Yeah.
It's amazing that you could hear me. My inner voice has a much louder voice than I thought. I think Albert Brooks, you mentioned that there was a long time between some of his work, at least public work. And I believe, didn't he have like a nervous, I don't want to start rumors, but didn't he have like some kind of something that took him out of the public eye for a long time? I thought it was like a nervous breakdown or something. At least that's how I remember it. And I remember when he was coming back, it was sort of like a big deal that he was returning to the public view, but I don't remember what the issue was.
Yeah,
does that ring a bell with either of you guys?
It doesn't. I don't see anything in the little research that I have here.
No, it doesn't. for me either. It's quite possible, but yeah, I don't know.
It's possible, but
maybe I went into rehab and I had delusions about Albert Brooks. No,
but he's on. He did make an appearance on Curb recently, which a couple of appearances are pretty funny.
Yeah, as himself, right?
Yeah, as himself, and he wanted to do a funeral. Wanted to have a funeral for himself while he was alive.
Right.
But alive, I don't know what they called it, but anyway. So, all right. So
Will
Ferrell.
A second, I just looked online. It says Albert Brooks had a panic attack and a nervous breakdown performing on stage in Boston. It doesn't say what year it was, but I'm not losing my mind.
Okay.
All right. Well, maybe I am, but for different reasons. But I did remember that.
Well, I was glad to see him back. Let's put it that way. He was,
for sure. Yeah, brilliant guy.
Brilliant guy. He made it to the Sweet 16. There's nothing wrong with that. Okay, final two. Drum roll. Abbott Costello versus Steve Martin. Looks like who started that last one? That was David. You start this one.
Oh boy.
Yeah.
Abbott and Costello, Steve Martin. Oh, this is painful. I don't know. Can I pass?
Like literally, they should be the final two for me. Quite frankly, like
what's that?
They literally should be maybe the final four, but the final two for me. Like they're that
it's
high.
tough to eliminate one of them at this stage. It really is. I'm going to go back to, I'm more comfortable. I've known Steve Martin my whole life, and I've always laughed at him, so I'm going to say Steve Martin.
Okay, you're entitled certainly to your opinion, and I do join that opinion. However, I've also known in one form or another, not of course in their formative years ever, Abbott Costello. I only know them from the radio, which I've listened to every one of their radio shows, which is tons as you can get on YouTube, as well as of course their movies and television show, which was the foundation in some ways for Seinfeld. At least that's what Seinfeld says. Boy, meanwhile, Steve Martin is just so creative unto himself. Was a writer on the Smothers Brothers too, so it wasn't like he's just been, thinking of himself. He's done work for others, and he writes books that I've not read. I don't know if anybody has, if they're funny or not.
Plays. He writes
plays. He's incredibly prolific. But in my life, in my world, Abbott Costello just carries the day. I can't help it. Their teamwork and their routines, I can still watch to this day. I've gone back and listened to Let's Get Small, and I like it. But for whatever it's worth, it doesn't carry as much as it used to for me in terms of and we're splitting hairs, but it doesn't carry as much gravitas as all of the Abbott Costello routines still do to this day. They still seem fresh to me. So I'm going to say Abbott Costello and leave it up to Dan, and Dan's going to make an enemy here one way or the other, I think.
Yeah, no kidding. I was hoping that you were going to say the same thing as David. So I feel like on this one, it's like a wrestling match between my inner children. My teenager years was definitely all about Steve Martin and has continued. My younger days as more of a youngster was definitely, Abbott and Costello was the world and has continued to be a strong influence on my comedic sense as well. So yeah, really, really hard. I appreciate so much you guys dumping this one on me. But if I think if it's between my inner children, the younger version and then the teenager version, I think just because the teenager version is larger, it could probably take the younger version of me in a wrestling match. I'm gonna just close my eyes and point to Steve Martin and say he's got my vote.
All right, there we go. We've got our Elite Eight: Larry David, David Letterman, Richard Pryor, Bob and Ray, Neil Simon, the Marx Brothers, Will Ferrell, and Steve Martin. Isn't that interesting? We're going to have to kind of really dig in, so to speak, and figure out something more to say about each of these individuals when they go up against each other next week. We're going to have Larry David against David Letterman, Richard Pryor against Bob and Ray, Neil Simon against the Marx Brothers, Will Ferrell against Steve Martin. That is a tough bracket, that last bracket. It's always been a tough bracket. But, okay, so we're going to have a winner next week of who is the funniest of all time. And I would say this might be interesting to do this again give it some time, maybe a year and a half, something. Give some time and do this again from scratch. I bet we come up with a different answer. What do you think?
Probably.
So it doesn't mean much. It's just our musings here. We'll be back right at this. I should say we'll be back next week to continue the exploration of who's the funniest of all time. Got a couple seconds here, David or Dan. Anything to add to where we are at this point?
I was just thinking about your comment about doing it again in a year. And we probably would have some different answers because there were some of these that were so slim, and one change of one bracket has a big impact. Just looking at now, we've got Will Ferrell against Steve Martin. Oh my God. Like either one of them might be able to take the whole thing. So
yeah, but like we pull them from the hat, right? So maybe pull the names from the hat for the brackets means something, right? Of course, in my world, it shouldn't mean anything for the ultimate winner. The winner should win all the way through anyway, no matter what the competition is, in theory, right? But the rest of it can absolutely be affected by the fact that, what bracket you're in. Does that make sense, David?
It does. But I'm still looking at the final 8. I'm like, oh, I don't know. I think we could have done better, guys.
Well, we'll find out next week. And Everything Old is New Again.